The secret that killed Rock Hudson. How Hollywood's most masculine star was destroyed by his own success. October 2nd, 1985. Rock Hudson, once Hollywood's most desirable leading man and the embodiment of American masculinity, appeared on television looking gaunt, frail, and visibly dying from AIDS. The man who had made millions of women swoon in romantic comedies was finally telling the truth, but only because he was too close to death to continue the lie. For 30 years, Rock Hudson had been Hollywood's biggest star and its most tortured prisoner, forced to hide his true self so completely that he had become a stranger even to himself. What killed Rock Hudson wasn't just a disease. It was a lifetime of living as someone he was never meant to be. This is the Rock Hudson story that exposes Hollywood's cruelest conspiracy. Not the charming romantic lead from Pillow Talk or the strong silent type from Giant. This is about a gentle, sensitive man who was transformed into a masculine icon through systematic abuse, forced heterosexuality, and a studio system that would rather destroy a human being than admit homosexuality existed. Because Rock Hudson wasn't just closeted, he was imprisoned. For 3 decades, he lived in terror that someone would discover his secret and destroy the career that had become both his salvation and his curse. The man who became Rock Hudson was born Roy Harold Scherer Jr., a shy, awkward boy who knew from childhood that he was different. Roy was born in 1925 in Winnetka, Illinois, to parents who divorced when he was 8 years old. His father abandoned the family, leaving Roy to be raised by his mother, Catherine, and an abusive stepfather who made it clear that any sign of weakness or femininity would be met with violence. Roy learned early that survival meant hiding his true nature. He was attracted to boys, not girls, but in the 1930s and 1940s, homosexuality wasn't just socially unacceptable. It was considered a mental illness and a criminal behavior. Roy understood that his feelings were dangerous, not just to his reputation, but potentially to his physical safety. As a teenager, Roy was tall, handsome, and naturally athletic, but he was also sensitive, artistic, and completely uninterested in the aggressive masculinity that was expected of young men. He learned to perform heterosexuality the way other people learned to act as a survival skill that might save his life. Roy arrived in Hollywood in 1947. Agent Henry Wilson saw in him the perfect raw material for manufactured stardom. Wilson was one of Hollywood's most successful talent agents, but he was also a predator who specialized in recruiting young, vulnerable men and molding them into marketable stars. Wilson was gay himself, but his business model was built on creating hyper-masculine screen personas for homosexual actors, while maintaining strict control over their personal lives. Wilson looked at the shy, inexperienced Roy Scherer and saw dollar signs. Roy had the physical attributes to be a leading man. He was 6'4", devastatingly handsome, and had a naturally deep voice. But more importantly, for Wilson's purposes, Roy was completely dependent on his guidance and terrified of having his sexuality exposed. Wilson renamed Roy Rock Hudson, a name designed to suggest strength, stability, and unshakable masculinity. He enrolled Rock in acting classes, voice coaching, and physical training. Most importantly, he began the process of completely erasing Roy Scherer and replacing him with a carefully constructed heterosexual fantasy. The transformation of Roy into Rock was systematic, brutal, and completely successful. Wilson controlled every aspect of Rock's life and career. He chose Rock's roles, his public appearances, and even his personal relationships. Rock was forbidden from being seen with men socially unless they were clearly identified as business associates. He was required to date women publicly and to be photographed with different starlets on a regular basis. Most cruelly, Wilson made it clear that Rock's success depended entirely on maintaining his heterosexual image. Any hint of his true sexuality would result in the immediate destruction of his career and public humiliation that would follow him for the rest of his life. "Henry owned me completely," Rock later told friends. He had created Rock Hudson, and he could destroy him just as easily. "I was trapped playing a character that everyone loved. But that character wasn't me." Rock's breakthrough role in Magnificent Obsession, 1954, made him a star. But it also made him a prisoner. The success of Magnificent Obsession, followed by Giant, 1956, and Pillow Talk, 1959, established Rock Hudson as one of Hollywood's biggest stars and most bankable leading men. Women adored him, men wanted to be him. And Hollywood executives saw him as the perfect embodiment of American masculinity. But Rock's success was built on a lie, so fundamental that it poisoned every aspect of his life. He couldn't have real relationships because any romantic partner was a potential threat to his career. He couldn't be himself in public because his true personality didn't match his screen image. He couldn't even relax in private because he was constantly afraid of being discovered. Rock began drinking heavily to cope with the stress of living a double life. He developed insomnia and anxiety that would plague him for the rest of his career. Most devastatingly, he began to lose touch with who Roy Scherer actually was. As Rock Hudson took over more and more of his existence, the cruelest aspect of Rock's situation was his forced marriage to Phyllis Gates in 1955. Gossip about Rock's sexuality began to circulate in Hollywood. Henry Wilson arranged for Rock to marry Phyllis Gates, Wilson's own secretary. The marriage was presented as a love story, but it was actually a business arrangement designed to provide Rock with heterosexual credibility. Phyllis later claimed she didn't know about Rock's sexuality when they married, but friends of both parties said this was impossible. The marriage was a sham from the beginning, designed to protect Rock's career at the expense of both partners' happiness and dignity. Rock and Phyllis divorced after 3 years, but the damage was done. Rock had been forced to lie about the most fundamental aspect of his identity, and he had dragged an innocent woman into his deception. The guilt from this forced marriage haunted Rock for the rest of his life. During his peak years in the 1960s, Rock Hudson was living a nightmare disguised as a dream dot to the outside world. Rock had everything: fame, fortune, critical acclaim, and the adoration of millions. But privately, he was deeply unhappy, increasingly alcoholic, and completely unable to have authentic relationships. Rock's few close friends described him as one of the loneliest people they had ever known. He couldn't trust anyone completely because everyone was a potential threat to his secret. He couldn't pursue romantic relationships openly because any partner could expose him. He couldn't even express his true personality because it didn't match the Rock Hudson brand. Most tragically, Rock began to internalize the homophobia that surrounded him. He started to believe that there was something fundamentally wrong with him, that his sexuality was a flaw that made him unworthy of love and success. The self-hatred became as destructive as the external pressures. Rock's secret gay life existed in the shadows of Hollywood's underground scene. Despite the risks, Rock did maintain relationships with men throughout his career. He was part of a secret network of gay actors, directors, and producers who socialized privately while maintaining heterosexual facades publicly. These relationships had to be conducted with extreme secrecy. Rock would meet partners at private parties in hidden locations, always with the understanding that discovery would mean professional suicide. He had several long-term relationships, but they were always secondary to his career and always threatened by the possibility of exposure. Rock's longest relationship was with Mark Christian, a young actor who lived with Rock during the 1980s. But even this relationship was complicated by Rock's need for secrecy. and his inability to be completely honest about his life and career. The beginning of the AIDS crisis in the early 1980s transformed Rock's secret from a career threat into a death sentence. When reports of a mysterious illness affecting gay men began appearing in 1981, Rock was terrified. He had been sexually active in the gay community for decades, and he understood that his lifestyle put him at risk for this new disease. Rock's worst fears were confirmed in 1984 when he was diagnosed with AIDS. The diagnosis was devastating, not just because it was a death sentence, but because it meant his sexuality would eventually be exposed. AIDS was still seen as a gay disease, and any admission that he had the illness would reveal the secret he had spent 30 years protecting. Rock's decision to hide his AIDS diagnosis was the final, tragic chapter in a lifetime of forced secrecy. When Rock was diagnosed, there were no effective treatments for AIDS, and the disease carried enormous social stigma. Rock and his representatives made the decision to hide his diagnosis and continue working as long as possible. This decision had devastating consequences, not just for Rock, but for everyone around him. Rock continued to have sexual relationships without disclosing his status, potentially exposing others to the virus. He continued to work in Hollywood, hiding his illness even as it became increasingly obvious that he was seriously ill. Most tragically, Rock spent his final healthy months living in the same prison of secrecy that had defined his entire career. Even facing death, he couldn't be honest about who he was or what was happening to him. Rock Hudson's final public appearance shocked the world and changed everything. In October 1985, Rock appeared on the television show Dynasty, playing a character involved in a romantic storyline with Linda Evans. But Rock was visibly ill, gaunt, weak, and clearly suffering from a serious illness. The contrast between the vital leading man audiences remembered and the sick man on their screens was heartbreaking. Shortly after the Dynasty appearance, Rock's publicist announced that the actor was suffering from AIDS. It was the first time a major Hollywood star had publicly acknowledged having the disease, and the announcement sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and American society. Rock Hudson's public disclosure of his AIDS diagnosis was both brave and tragic. On one hand, Rock's announcement brought unprecedented attention to the AIDS crisis and helped reduce the stigma surrounding the disease. His celebrity gave a face to an epidemic that many Americans had been content to ignore as long as it seemed to affect only marginalized communities. On the other hand, Rock's disclosure was forced upon him by his declining health and the impossibility of continuing to hide his condition. He didn't choose to come out of the closet. He was dragged out by circumstances beyond his control. Rock died on October 2, 1985, at the age of 59. His death was one of the first AIDS-related deaths to receive massive media attention, and it marked a turning point in public awareness of the epidemic. The aftermath of Rock Hudson's death revealed the full extent of his lifelong suffering. In the years following Rock's death, friends, colleagues, and former partners began speaking publicly about the man behind the Rock Hudson image. Their accounts painted a picture of someone who had been kind, generous, and fundamentally decent, but who had been forced to live a lie for his entire adult life. Mark Christian, Rock's final partner, filed a lawsuit claiming that Rock had exposed him to AIDS without disclosing his diagnosis. The lawsuit revealed intimate details of Rock's secret life and the lengths he had gone to hide his sexuality, even from his closest partners. Most heartbreakingly, friends revealed that Rock had spent his final years expressing regret about the life he had been forced to live. He had wanted to come out publicly for years, but had been too afraid of the consequences for his career and too conditioned by decades of secrecy to take the risk. Rock Hudson's story represents the tragic cost of Hollywood's systematic oppression of LGBTQ people. Rock was part of a generation of gay actors who were forced to choose between their authentic selves and their careers. The studio system that made him famous also imprisoned him, creating a situation where his greatest professional asset, his masculine appeal to female audiences, was built on the complete denial of his true identity. The psychological damage from living this double life was enormous. Rock suffered from depression, alcoholism, and an inability to form healthy relationships. That can be directly traced to the stress of maintaining his false heterosexual identity. But Rock's story also represents the beginning of change in Hollywood and American society. His public disclosure of his AIDS diagnosis, while forced by circumstances, helped bring national attention to the AIDS crisis and began to change public attitudes toward both the disease and homosexuality. Rock's death galvanized activists and contributed to increased funding for AIDS research and treatment. More broadly, Rock's story helped expose the cruelty of the closet and the psychological damage caused by forcing people to deny their authentic selves. His experience became part of the evidence that would eventually lead to greater LGBTQ plus acceptance in Hollywood and beyond. Today, Rock Hudson is remembered not just as a movie star, but as a victim of systematic oppression who became an inadvertent pioneer for LGBTQ plus rights. His films are still celebrated for their entertainment value, but his life story serves as a reminder of the human cost of prejudice and the importance of allowing people to live authentically. Rock's experience also serves as a historical lesson about the evolution of American attitudes towards sexuality and gender. The same society that forced him to hide his identity for 30 years would, within a few decades, celebrate openly gay actors and same-sex marriage. The real tragedy of Rock Hudson's life wasn't that he was gay. It was that he was forced to pretend he wasn't. In a different era, Rock could have been both a successful actor and an openly gay man. His talent, charm, and screen presence would have made him a star regardless of his sexuality. But the homophobia of his time turned his identity into a source of shame and fear rather than pride and authenticity. Rock Hudson's legacy reminds us that the closet isn't just about hiding. It's about the psychological damage that comes from being forced to deny who you are. The stress of maintaining his false identity contributed to Rock's alcoholism, depression, and inability to form healthy relationships. It prevented him from seeking medical help when he first became ill because he was afraid that treatment would expose his sexuality. Most tragically, the closet robbed Rock of the opportunity to live authentically and find genuine happiness. He spent his entire adult life playing a character instead of being himself, and that performance ultimately killed him. Today, when we watch Rock Hudson's films, we're seeing both a great actor and a man in prison. Every romantic scene with a female co-star was a performance not just of his character's feelings, but of a heterosexual identity that was never his. Every interview where he discussed his bachelor lifestyle or his search for the right woman was a lie that he was forced to tell to protect his career. Understanding Rock's real story doesn't diminish his films or his talent. It makes them more poignant and his performances more impressive. He was literally acting for his life, creating a convincing heterosexual persona, while hiding his true self so completely that even his closest friends sometimes forgot who he really was. Rock Hudson's story is ultimately about the courage required to survive in a hostile world. Took enormous strength for Rock to maintain his career while living under the constant threat of exposure. It took incredible resilience to continue working and creating while dealing with the psychological pressure of his double life. and it took a different kind of courage for him to finally, in his last months, allow the truth to come to light. Even though his disclosure was forced by his illness, Rock's decision to be honest about his AIDS diagnosis helped save countless lives and advance LGBTQ+ rights. What do you think? Does Rock Hudson's story change how you see the classic Hollywood era and the price of fame? Share your thoughts about how far we've come in accepting LGBTQ+ people, and how much further we still need to go. If this story moved you, subscribe for more untold truths about the Golden Age stars who paid impossible prices for their success. Because understanding their struggles helps us build a more accepting world for everyone. Rock Hudson showed us that living a lie, no matter how successful it makes you, is never worth the cost to your soul.